January 15, 2009 started just like 10,000 other days, literally. And Flight 1549 initially, like all those other flights for so long, was completely routine and unremarkable for the first 100 seconds. But this very suddenly, and I was aware of it at the time, became the worst day of my life. We were traveling at that point 316 feet per second. So I saw the birds about 3 football field lengths ahead, but not enough time to maneuver away from them. And then they filled the windscreen as if it were a Hitchcock film. And this was a large flock of large birds. The species Canada geese, they weigh 8 or 10, sometimes 12 pounds. They have 5-foot or 6-foot wingspans. And they struck the airplane along the leading edges of the wings, the nose, and into the center, the core of both jet engines. Now, jet engines are turbines. They're finely balanced machinery spinning at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, and having a 10-pound object or two go through each of them in the center, the core of the engine, is incredibly damaging and disruptive. Immediately I could hear terrible noises from the machinery being damaged I'd never heard in an airplane before. I could feel terrible vibrations I'd never felt in an airplane before. And then I received confirmation of what I believed had happened when I could smell coming into the cabin air the burning bird odor from the engines. And then the thrust loss was sudden, complete, symmetrical bilaterally, both engines at once. It felt as if the bottom had fallen out of our world. And my body responded immediately in a very normal human way to this sudden life-threatening stress. I was aware of that as it happened. I could feel my pulse shoot up, my blood pressure spike, my perceptual field narrow in tunnel vision because of the stress. I remember vividly my first 3 conscious thoughts. This can't be happening. Having read about many accident flights, a very typical response rooted in disbelief, followed immediately by, this doesn't happen to me. In other words, for over 4 decades, I had never been so challenged in an airplane I doubted the outcome. Followed immediately by a realization that unlike all those other flights I'd had for 42 years, this one probably would not end on a runway with the aircraft undamaged. And I was okay with that, as long as I could solve the problem. And so even though we'd never trained for this, in flight simulators at the airline, it was not possible to practice a water landing. They aren't programmed for it. The only training we'd ever gotten for a water landing was a theoretical classroom discussion. But because I had learned my craft so well, I knew my airplane and my profession so intimately, I could set clear priorities. And so I chose to do only the highest priority items. And then I had the discipline to ignore everything I did not have time to do as being only distractions and potential detriments to our performance. You see, I'm also well-read, and so I knew the neurobiology. I knew that multitasking is a myth, that when we think we're multitasking, what we are in fact doing is switching rapidly between tasks, not doing either of them well. And so I chose not to try to do too much. Within a few seconds, by memory, I had taken the first 2 remedial actions that we would eventually get to on the checklist over a minute later, over a third of the way through the remaining flight time. But I needed those actions to be effective immediately and not to wait. I turned on the engine ignition so if the engines could recover, they would. And I started the airplane's auxiliary power unit. I knew it was only a matter of a few minutes before our flight path intersected the surface of the Earth. I had to choose the best possible place for that to happen. Having flown into New York